Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to welcome some Alabamians that are in the audience, in particular, Laura Kate Robertson, who is a senior in high school and is an outstanding star, and certainly proud to have her here today. Also, just want to say thank you for holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman. It's clear, and it's been no secret, that our financial regulators have become increasingly politicized over the last 4 years. We have heard our ranking member talk about the number of complaints that have been made to the CFPB over the last 3 years, and yet this committee, in the last 2 years, led by obviously one of our Democratic counterparts, has not held a hearing diving into this. So thank you, because this must stop. This is the United States of America, and what's happening is completely and totally unacceptable. Look, when you're prioritizing a social agenda or a political one instead of actually ensuring that people have an opportunity and access to the American dream, we've got to call that for what it is. And obviously, our large institutions play a vital role in our country and our banking system, but they need to stick to that, banking, not politics. And so, Mr. Ring, what you've testified here to today is incredibly alarming, and we need to get to the bottom of that. I also just want to point out something that my colleagues have to hear me say all of the time, and that is just how grateful I am for our community banks and credit unions in Alabama that serve our local communities and give people access to the American dream. And remember that that is actually what they're there for. So thank you to them. I do want to get to the bottom and better understand what spurred this debanking and why certain industries and conservative-aligned groups have been targeted over others. And importantly, how we can prevent this moving forward. So I want to start by quickly clarifying a few things for the record. The first Trump administration finalized a fair access to banking rule focused specifically on addressing this issue. Mr. Gannon, what happened to that rule?
That rule was revoked on January 20th, 2021.
Tell me who revoked that.
The President of the United States.
That's the day he was sworn in.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. And so the day he was sworn in, he said, we're not going to do this.
There were a number of rules that were revoked that day. That happened to be one of them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gannon. Is the supervision of the reputational risk a directive from Congress or found anywhere in law?
Well, that's a little bit of a complex question. It certainly is found in law in the sense that Congress has directed the banking agencies to conduct supervisory activities, but the details about how that supervisory activity is conducted is almost entirely generated by the regulators themselves.
And you mentioned earlier the subjective nature of
Right.
that. Does the reputational risk have any real connection to the material safety and soundness of a bank?
Almost on no occasions that at least the literature has been able to come up with is there a connection between reputational risk and some of the basic elements of banking, capital, liquidity, operations, and so on. There's a disconnect there. And in fact, the regulators, and this is quite interesting, at least to me, the regulators have defined stakeholders for reputational risk, and one of those stakeholders is themselves. So it's a little bit difficult to argue with a regulator when they say you've got reputational risk.
Now that's something.
Because you're arguing with the stakeholder that owns that reputational risk.
Tell me, you mentioned earlier in your testimony about management rating, and you
Correct.
said many times it has actually nothing to do with management. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Well, I'll go back, Senator, what I just said. If you look at how banks really are resilient today, how they have higher levels of capital today, how they have more liquidity than ever, how they have invested. A very interesting statistic in 2016, which is a baseline that this data comes from, which was not an easy year for banks. Mr. Cirillo was still the kind of acting vice chair for supervision of the Fed. Banks spent, let's say, $100 on technology in terms of compliance. Mm-hmm. Last year, banks would have spent $160 for the same activity. So banks have poured money into technology, into compliance, et cetera. Now, are banks perfect? No. Do things slide through? Yes, they do. But I don't think anybody can doubt the commitment to invest in these sorts of things, and reputation risk doesn't have anything to do with that.
Thank you very much. And in my final few seconds, Mr. Ring, just to level set here, What are the real world impacts to a small, legally operating business if they are denied access to our financial system? Because I know that you have seen that firsthand.
Well, if you can't make payments and if you can't bank, then you can't exist in America. It is, and it's happened in crypto. It's happened in the Second Amendment space. It's happened among conservative causes. You can't exist without banking.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.